The Atlantic winds howled across the shores of Long Island's South Fork, carrying with them the echoes of centuries past. The Hamptons, a place of wealth and beauty in the modern age, held secrets beneath its sandy beaches and weathered clapboard homes. From the native tribes who first walked its shores to the English settlers who claimed it, the land bore witness to triumphs and tragedies, each leaving a spectral mark. The ghosts of the Hamptons were not mere tales told by firelight. They were woven into the very fabric of the place, their whispers carried by the sea breeze, their shadows lingering in the salt air. The eastern tip of Long Island, where the land splits into the north and south forks like the tail of a great shark, was a crucible of history. Here in the shadow of Gardiner's Island, stories of witch trials, buried treasure, and restless spirits took root. The longer a place is inhabited, the more it holds onto its past, and the Hamptons, with nearly 400 years of human strife, was a graveyard of memories waiting to stir. Long before the sails of European ships dotted the horizon, the land belonged to the Montaukett, Shinnecock, and other Algonquian tribes. They lived in harmony with the land, fishing the rich waters of the Atlantic, farming maize, and hunting in the dense forest that stretched across the island. Their culture was vibrant, their villages interconnected by trade and kinship. They believed the land was alive, imbued with spirits that guided and protected them. The sea, too, was a force of power, its depths home to both bounty and mystery. When the Dutch arrived in the early 17th century, the natives saw no immediate threat. The island was vast, and there was room for all, or so they thought. But the white men kept coming, their numbers swelling as they claimed land for farms and settlements. The Montaukett and Shinnecock tried to coexist, but the tide of change was relentless. The Europeans brought with them an invisible enemy, smallpox. It swept through the tribes like wildfire, felling entire villages. Those who survived faced displacement, their sacred places trampled underfoot by newcomers who cared little for their traditions. By the time the English arrived in 1640, the native presence was waning. Lyon Gardiner, a stout-hearted Englishman from Connecticut, purchased an island nestled between the forks of Long Island, a place that would bear his name. Gardiner's Island became a foothold for English influence, a microcosm of the changes sweeping the region. The man himself was a figure of authority, his decisions shaping the fledgling settlements of Southold, Southampton, and East Hampton. But even as he built a legacy, the land whispered of those who came before, their spirits restless in the face of loss. Gardiner's Island was more than a strategic outpost. It was a place of secrets. The Gardiner family, led by Lyon and his descendants, established themselves as lords of the manor, their wealth and influence growing with each generation. By the 20th century, Robert Gardiner, the 16th Lord of the Manor, boasted of their cunning. "We have always married into wealth. We've covered all our bets. We were on both sides of the Revolution and both sides of the Civil War. The Gardiner family always came out on top." Such hubris, however, invited whispers of a curse. Gothic tales abounded of families whose ambition sowed the seeds of their own ruin, and the Gardiners were no exception. Their island, a rocky outcrop, battered by Atlantic storms, was said to be haunted by more than just the ghosts of displaced natives. The family's own history, marked by greed, betrayal, and untimely deaths, seemed to cling to the land like mist. One such tale centered on Elizabeth Gardiner, Lyon's second daughter, who died in 1658 under mysterious circumstances. The day before her death, Elizabeth, racked with fever and pain, accused a neighbor, Elizabeth Garlick, of witchcraft. The accusation sent ripples through East Hampton, a town already steeped in Puritan fervor. Garlic was tried, her fate hanging in the balance as the community grappled with fear of the supernatural. Though she was ultimately acquitted, the trial left a stain on the town, a reminder that the line between the living and the dead was thin. Elizabeth Gardner's spirit, it was said, never left the island. Fishermen claimed to see a pale figure standing on the cliffs, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if searching for justice. Some believed she was bound to the land by her own accusation, her soul unable to rest until the truth of her death was uncovered. Others whispered that the Gardner family's wealth, built on the suffering of others, had cursed them all, dooming their line to be haunted by their own kin. In 1699, the legend of Gardner's Island took a darker turn with the arrival of Captain William Kidd. The infamous pirate, returning from a spree in the Indian Ocean, anchored off the island's shores. With the law closing in, Kidd sought a safe haven for his ill-gotten gains. He struck a deal with John Gardner, Lyon's grandson, burying a chest and a box of gold, along with 2 boxes of silver in the island's sandy soil. In exchange, Gardner received a piece of gold cloth and a bag of sugar, a small price for complicity in a pirate's scheme. Kidd's parting words were a chilling threat. If Gardner dug up the treasure or revealed its location, death would follow. When Kidd was captured and tried in Boston, Gardner produced the treasure, but not without keeping a single diamond for his daughter, Mary. The act of defiance seemed to seal the island's fate as a place of restless spirits. Sailors reported strange lights flickering on the island at night, and some swore they heard Kidd's voice cursing from the waves. The treasure, though recovered, left a legacy of greed and betrayal. Stories spread of Kidd's ghost, a shadowy figure pacing the beaches, searching for his lost diamond. The Gardner family, too, seemed touched by the pirate's curse. Disputes over the island's ownership led to bitter feuds, with each generation grappling with the weight of their ancestors' choices. The diamond, passed down through the family, was said to carry a malevolent energy, bring misfortune to those who held it. The shadow of the witch trials lingered over the Hamptons, casting a pall of suspicion and fear. Elizabeth Garlick's trial in 1658 was only the beginning. The Puritan settlers, steeped in superstition, saw the devil's hand in every misfortune. Storms that wrecked ships, crops that failed, and children who fell ill were all blamed on unseen forces. Women, in particular, bore the brunt of these accusations, their independence or eccentricity marking them as suspects. In East Hampton, the legacy of the witch hunt took on a life of its own. The town's oldest homes, built in the 17th century, were said to be haunted by the spirits of those accused. One such house, the Mulford Farm, stood as a testament to the era's paranoia. Locals claimed to hear footsteps pacing the upper floors, and some reported seeing a woman in a gray cloak, her face obscured, standing at the edge of the property. The sea, too, played its part in the region's supernatural lore. Shipwrecks littered the South Shore, their crews lost to the Atlantic's fury. Fishermen told of ghostly figures rising from the waves, their voices calling for help that never came. One tale spoke of the Amityville Phantom, a ship that sank off Montauk in 1702. On moonless nights, its crew was said to row ashore in spectral boats, their oars silent against the water. The combination of witch trials and maritime tragedies gave rise to a unique brand of folk horror. The Hamptons, for all its modern glamour, was a place where the past refused to stay buried. The land and sea were intertwined, each feeding the other's stories of loss and vengeance. By the 21st century, the Hamptons had transformed into a playground for the wealthy, its beaches lined with mansions and its towns bustling with tourists. Yet the ghosts remained, undeterred by the passage of time. The Gardner family still held sway over their island, though their numbers dwindled and their disputes grew more public. Robert Gardner's death in 2004 marked the end of an era, but the island's spectral residents showed no signs of leaving. In East Hampton, the Mulford Farm became a museum, its ghostly inhabitants a draw for paranormal enthusiasts. Visitors reported cold spots in the attic and the sound of a woman's voice singing a lullaby. The nearby Home Sweet Home Museum, once the residence of John Howard Payne, was said to be haunted by a child's spirit, its laughter echoing through the halls. The sea continued to yield its ghosts. Divers exploring the wrecks off Montauk spoke of strange currents that seemed to pull them toward the ocean floor, as if the dead were reaching out. On foggy nights, the Montauk Lighthouse was said to glow with an unnatural light, guiding spectral ships to shore. The Hamptons' modern residents, accustomed to luxury, were not immune to the region's haunted legacy. Stories circulated of wealthy newcomers encountering unexplained phenomena in their newly built homes. Lights flickered without cause, doors slammed in empty rooms, and shadows moved in the corners of their vision. Some dismissed these as tricks of the mind, but others, steeped in the region's history, knew better. The Hamptons and its ghosts were inseparable, bound by the weight of history and the pull of the sea. From the native tribes who first walked its shores to the settlers who claimed it, from the pirates who buried their treasure to the witches who faced the gallows, each left a mark on the land. The Atlantic, ever restless, carried their stories, washing them ashore with every tide. Gardner's Island remained the heart of the haunting, its cliffs and beaches a stage for the region's darkest tales. The Gardner family, cursed or not, stood as a testament to the price of ambition. The ghosts of Elizabeth Gardner, Captain Kidd, and countless others lingered, their voices a reminder that the past is never truly gone. As the sun set over the south shore, casting long shadows across the dunes, the Hamptons whispered its secrets. To those who listened, the wind carried a warning. Some debts can never be paid, and some spirits can never be laid to rest. The breeze had picked up. The moon high in the sky and the little fire on the beach was blessedly warm. The older gentleman spoke softly, a gentle lilt to his voice as he retraced the history of Fire Island and the Fire Island Lighthouse. There seems to be some disagreement about how Fire Island came by its name. There's one camp that claims it's Dutch. The Dutch were about the first people in this area, you know. When they came here, they found 4 inlets where they could bring in their boats, and the Dutch name for 4 is VA. Have you ever seen any of the old maps? Queer things indeed, hard to read, and of course, it made no sense to the average Englishman who came later. And it's thought that when they read VA, they mistook it for fire, and so it became Fire Island. And then there's others who claim it's from the Wreckers, who were pirates in all but name only. They would set a fire on the lee side of the island, and merchant ships would head for that light, particularly in a storm, thinking they would find safe harbor. Instead, they would run aground and come apart here on the island. "Get to the part about the ghosts, Grandpa," a small voice said from the other side of the fire ring. 3 little heads were barely visible, huddled close together, only their eyes shining from the firelight in the darkness. Behind them, the Atlantic was bluish-gray, the white caps of the surf flickering and disappearing as they crashed up on the beach. "Just keep your britches on, we'll get to that," he said, with just a trace of irritation. The old fellow knew his business. A ghost story is by nature short, as is an encounter with a ghost. Seeing a ghost can be like the flicker of a candle, just a shifting of shapes in the light, and it's gone before you can even speak the word. A ghost story, therefore, by nature, but be fed to the listener like letting out the line from a rod and reel, waiting for the listener to take the bait. The first people to live on the island came here in 1653 when a fellow, he glanced over at Miss Bronwyn and me, Isaac Stratford, fellow out of Babylon, if memory serves me correct, built a whaling station and called it by the name of Whale House Point. Old man Stratford and his boys would haul boats across Fire Island from the lee side over here to the beach. They built towers up there on the dunes and would scan the horizon during the day. Well, sooner or later, there'd be a spout of water coming out of Whale, and old man Stratford would shout out, "Whale off," and they'd all haul arse into the boats, and off they'd go. Harpoons, rope, the whole 9 yards, because there was good money to be had in those days from whales. They learned the technique from the Indians of the area, but it was the white men who turned it into commerce. So they'd load the great fish up with harpoons, and attached to these harpoons were what was called a drogue. A drogue is a barrel or a sealskin which has been inflated and then sealed off, and once you got the harpoons in it, the whale would tire itself out trying to submerge and stay down, and eventually the boys could pull up beside it and spear it to death. Then they'd haul it up to the beach, all blood-soaked and smeared with blubber, and pull out the knives and the saws and get to work. The oil lit their lanterns, and of course, they could turn that into a bit of coin. The bones went into combs and such, collars that the men were wearing at the time, umbrellas, and later on, hoops for women's dresses. Now, by about the 1800s, there weren't any more whales close to the shore. Either they had been hunted out, or the whales had wizened up, so to hunt for whales meant you needed a ship, and Whale House Point was pretty soon forgotten. But ships were forever running aground on the island or sinking off the island in the shallow waters. So in 1826, they decided to build a lighthouse there on the end of the island, right next to the inlet. Over the years, the sand has stretched itself out, and of course, the inlet starts several miles down the beach. But they threw the lighthouse up there with blue split rock imported and shipped in from the Connecticut River. It wasn't nearly as tall as this one is, just about 75 foot. And it was 8-sided. "An octagon," said a small voice from the darkness. "That's right, an octagon," he said and continued. "But it wasn't tall enough. Ships far out sea couldn't see the light, and in fog or bad weather it was all but invisible." He looked off into the darkness, and our eyes followed, and the light flashed brightly for an instant before disappearing again, repeating itself endlessly a half-mile or so down the beach. "They say what spelled the end for that lighthouse was a shipwreck. Now there were countless shipwrecks up and down this coast, but usually the poor drowned fellows were just sailors, and a sailor's life wasn't worth a plugged nickel in those days. If you made your living from the sea, you had to expect that at any time you might die from the sea as well. But this wasn't just anyone feeding the fish this time. She was a society woman with a mouthful of a name. Sarah Margaret Fuller, a Cambridge gal from up in Massachusetts. She was something of a thinking woman, the first one to be admitted to Harvard Library, as it was called then, a school teacher, literary critic, and a writer herself. Now, all these literary types of the day, Emerson, Thoreau, and even Walt Whitman, who was a Long Island boy, knew her and knew her stuff, and thought she was just the bee's knees. Then old Horace Greeley of the New York Times made her the first woman correspondent to come out of the States. She went to Rome and fell in love, got mixed up in the revolution there with a Marchese with an ever longer name, the Marchese Giovanni Angelo Asoli. And eventually her and the Marchese got themselves married, had a baby, and decided that coming back here would be a better option than the guillotine or the mob. So off they went on the merchant ship Elizabeth. This would have been about 1850 or so. It was a horrible, horrible journey. Smallpox spread through the ship. The captain died, and that left a fellow with at most half a brain to steer them the rest of the way. And of course, the Atlantic is pretty unforgiving to fools. They got caught in a storm out there just off the beach, and he ran the ship aground thinking the lighthouse was the Cape May Lighthouse, and so thought he was off New Jersey. He tells everyone to get ready to be in New York Harbor by daybreak, and so they all put on their finery, as it turns out, to drown in. Anyway, Margaret, the Marches, and their little boy Angelo got washed over the side as the ship slowly sank to the bottom and was never found. Now lots of bodies have washed up, often right here at the foot of the lighthouse, and it's said that from time to time you can still see Maggie walking along the beach, looking for her lost manuscript, which she was bringing back to New York with her little boy and husband following along behind. But at any rate, since such an important person had died this time, they decided they needed a bigger lighthouse out here on the island. Friends in high places put the squeeze on Congress, and out popped $40,000, and within a year this lighthouse was up, more than twice as high as the original. "How high is this one?" Miss Bronwyn asked, and the old gent turned to her. The folks that work in the lighthouse now and there in the gift shop say they hear doors slamming when no one else is there, footsteps climbing the tower, a crazy laughing as the old keeper climbs the steps, rope in hand looking for a place to tie it off so he can do his last lonely dance. Some of them say there ain't no ghosts at all in there, that they are all just stories which somebody made up to sell a book. But true or not, that's the story. It had grown late, and I noticed Miss Bronwyn yawning, and so we got up, said our goodbyes, and started back down the beach. "So, do you buy any of it?" she asked. "The hauntings, I mean." "Well, I climbed to the top of it myself, you know." She looked at me, her eyebrow arching skeptically. "You, whose knees shake when you climb a stepladder." "That'd be me. And okay. So I don't like heights. But I figure if I put myself up against enough of them, eventually I'll get over it. Anyway, I climbed up there, and it's an ungodly climb too, I might add. I know I'm not exactly lithe, but there was a guy bigger than myself huffing and puffing his way up the spiral staircase below me. I looked down once or twice, and that was more than enough, as you can see, straight down, almost to the bottom. We were about to the top, and I could have sworn I heard his heart beating from one flight up, then realized it was mine. The top is pretty claustrophobic, and up there was a young lady whose job it is, I assume, to prevent people from hurling themselves off. So I go out to take some photos, get on the catwalk before it strikes me, oh, that's right, I'm petrified of heights. So I'm plastered against the wall of the thing, keeping at least one hand with a death grip on anything that feels solid at all times, figure I've had enough, and go in to talk to her. I ask her if there are any ghosts here, and she tells me pretty much the same story as the old fellow back there. So is it possible? Sure. Why not? She looked at me again, the eyebrow still arched. Actually, I can believe the idea that it's haunted more than I can believe you climbed to the top without either money being involved or a gun stuck between your ribs. I sniffed indignantly and looked out to sea. In the darkness, the light of a ship flickered in the darkness, and I thought of the history of the place. There were the rum runners in the 20th century, hundreds of thousands of immigrants, whose first sight of America was the light of Fire Island Lighthouse's beacon from far out to sea. And with a bit of pride, I walked on down the beach, satisfied that I had climbed to the top of a piece of history.